If you've ever finished eating and immediately felt bogged down by feelings of guilt, shame, or anxiety about it, then you already know exactly what food guilt feels like. And you don't need me to tell you that it sucks. It can feel like one bite has the power to derail your entire day, your week, your month, your year. And here we find ourselves every January making another New Year's resolution or trying another fad diet. My name is Cara, and I'm a registered dietitian, and I use an anti-diet approach to work through those feelings of guilt, shame, and anxiety around food. I've been there myself, and my clients in private practice struggle with this too. So today I'll be sharing some of my most important reminders and best pieces of advice. But first, I want to make a quick note about the difference between guilt and shame. That's because when it comes to food especially, they can be used interchangeably, but there's one important difference. Guilt is basically a learned response. It's conditioned. That's because no one is born thinking they should feel guilty about how many pieces of fruit they had that week or for enjoying a slice of cake at their friend's birthday party. But because of the messages we're getting from our parents or friends or from, pop culture or the healthcare system, we start to learn the judgment call we make is, I shouldn't have done that. That was wrong. That was bad. And it's no wonder when we hear that over and over again, we start to internalize that. And the subtle shift from guilt to shame happens when the message goes from that was wrong to I am wrong. That was bad to I am bad. We really internalize this idea that there is something so fundamentally wrong with us that we're broken, that we need to be fixed somehow, and we go searching for a solution. The solution, as you already might know, is usually a diet. It says, hey, that broken piece of you can be fixed if you just eliminate this entire food group, or if you commit and just want it badly enough. You can change your lifestyle, you can change yourself. That kicks off a vicious cycle, and it can be so damaging to our relationship with food, for our body image, our perception of our own self-worth. And after seeing this time and time again, what I've learned is the actual antidote to all of this food guilt and shame that we're feeling really comes in the form of neutrality, permission, and curiosity. So if you're ready to see how that works, let's get started with the idea of neutrality. So when you're feeling like an absolutely terrible human for having a second serving or ordering takeout instead of eating whatever you meal prepped, that's a pretty emotionally charged feeling. And in that moment, it can feel like we're just spiraling into some pretty dark thoughts. And when we're spiraling like that, it's as if we're driving down the highway with the cruise control set at 80 miles an hour. What we need is an off-ramp. We need a way to exit that spiral. So here's what I need you to do first. Pause and ask yourself, what is the purpose of food? Don't overthink it. Just ask, why do we eat? Well, first and foremost, food is meant to keep us alive. It's meant to nourish us, to energize us, to literally fill us up. And you don't need to feel guilty or ashamed about doing exactly that for yourself and your body. So if we just stop to consider even the high-level basics of nutrition, we've got our carbs, our fat, our protein, our fiber, vitamins, minerals, all these other things. And every single food in existence contains some combination of those nutrients. Now, we're not going to get into the weeds in this video, but I need you to know it does not matter if it has the most greenwashed, healthified label in existence, or if it's something you ate from a drive-through window. It is still just food. And yes, we will acknowledge that those foods are not nutritionally equal, but neither one of them needs to have morality attached to it. We don't have to give food the power to make us feel like a better or worse person because we did or didn't eat it. Now, just to be very clear, I'm not saying that every single food is morally neutral for every person. And I think that's maybe a common myth, especially now that anti-diet is becoming more and more popular. A common thing you'll hear is like, well, it's not nutritionally equal, but it's morally equal. And for some people, sure, that may be true. But what I've learned is that it is rarely that cut and dry. Now, I won't say it doesn't matter what you eat, because depending on your personal health status or your goals or your cultural background, sometimes it does matter what you eat. Nuance is key in nutrition, and this is especially true for Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color. They don't always get to say that food is morally neutral the way that someone with a more privileged identity gets to. And if you're living with another marginalized identity or in a higher weight body and feel the pressure to perform health at all times, then you also know that that nuance matters. But we can all start to look at food with more neutrality than we used to and say, you know what? I'm allowed to eat for any reason, and that reason doesn't have to be for optimized, perfect nutrition. So if we can start to let go of the expectation that we should always be eating right, whatever that means, We get to that next part about permission. So here's what I think you should do next. Get out a piece of paper or, open a note in your phone, something like that, and you're going to make 2 lists. The first is going to be your shoulds, the other your should nots. Just spend a little time thinking about all the different ways you direct yourself to behave around food. And it might sound like, okay, well, I shouldn't eat after 8 p.m. or I should work out so I can have a snack later. I shouldn't eat too much sugar, or I should track every single one of my calories. Whatever your list ends up looking like, it is what it is, and it's fine because we're not done yet. The next thing I want you to do is start thinking about how you might reframe some of those expectations to make you feel less guilty or ashamed. Could you give yourself permission to break out of only doing what you think you should or should not do? So to help put this in perspective, I'm going to use myself as an example. But when I was dieting all the time and arguably at my lowest point in my relationship with food, I felt like I had to be tracking every single bite I ate. And like a lot of people, I used an app on my phone to do it. I could scan a barcode or, look up the restaurant we were eating at or put in some of my own recipes, and it would spit out this nice little nutrition facts label and tell me exactly what was in that food. And that felt really safe, really comforting to know, okay, I have control over this. But if you're familiar with this particular app, it's not perfect. And there's a lot of things it didn't cover. So I felt like I shouldn't deviate from that, or I should only eat the things that I'm exactly able to track. Obviously, this wasn't a great option for anything like, getting invited to have dinner at someone's house or eating at a non-chain restaurant. Now, that caused a ton of anxiety, and I harbored so much shame and guilt about food at that point in my life. So part of the permission piece for me was starting out by saying, hey, you don't have to track every single bite. It's okay if you want to eat something that you can't look up and input in this app. It just, really helped put things in perspective to understand I had permission to break those self-imposed food rules, these arbitrary limits set by this app. And that really was the source of so much food guilt and shame. We need space to process all of that and in a way sort of deprogram our minds from defaulting to those should or should nots. And once we understand why they became our defaults, we can start to imagine what it would be like to break out of them for good. So that brings us to the curiosity piece of working through food guilt. And I hope at this point you're feeling less emotionally charged and more clear-headed, but it's tough to do this when you're feeling flustered. So take some time if you need it. But when you're ready, I'd like you to get out a journal or just spend some time reflecting on exactly what it is that brings up these feelings of food guilt or shame. In other words, it's time to get really, really curious. And I want you to try to honestly answer some really tough questions. It's going to feel uncomfortable. It might dredge up some really painful memories or deep-rooted beliefs about health and nutrition and food and who we are and our families and all this other baggage that comes with it, but that is part of the work. It's normal, it's natural, and I want you to know it's okay if you're feeling discomfort as you move through this process. However, on the other side, I know it's going to be worth it when you feel less food guilt in your day-to-day life. So the strategy we're using here is to repeat the question, what does that mean? And the whole point is to help us unravel these untold stories that we've constructed around food and eating. And I know that might sound a little confusing, so let's use another example. So starting with, the outermost layer of this emotional onion, if you will, that could sound like, I feel guilty for not eating what I meal prepped this weekend and going out for happy hour with a friend instead. And we're just going to ask, what does that mean on repeat? So the next layer might be, I feel like I have no self-control and I feel bad about wasting food I already had. Again, what does that mean? I feel like I'll use that as an excuse next time to avoid meal prep and I think I have no willpower. And what does that mean? I can't trust myself with food and I'm worried I won't have options. This diet feels like it doesn't give me the variety or social time that matters to me. So finally here, 3 or 4 or 5 layers in, we get to the root of where that food guilt starts. We start to understand the less obvious reasons that we're feeling the way we feel about that food choice. In the big scheme of things, that's not that big a deal, but we built it up because of the stories and the meanings that we attach to it. So at least in this example, it's helped us identify what was getting lost. We want to have variety and eat enjoyable things. We want to spend quality time with friends and be able to be spontaneous when things come up. We care about our spending habits and not wasting food. And we don't have to attach our morality as a good or bad person to any of it. And I need you to know there are no right or wrong answers. You cannot fail at this because it's simply whatever is true for you. But it may point to some of the changes you need to make to feel less guilt or shame around food. How to, live in a way that's more aligned with your values and what's most important. And that brings me to another good idea, because if you haven't already done some soul searching to establish what your values are, or, maybe it's just been a while and they could use an update, I really recommend doing that as the next step of healing your relationship with food. So don't worry, I've got you covered. You just need to click over to this next video where I'll be sharing one of the exercises I use with my clients in private practice. They found it really helpful for this purpose, and you might find it helpful too. So hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And as always, thank you for watching. I know it's not easy to do this work, but if you're ready to keep going, I'll see you in this next one.